From the national headquarters of RT America in our nation's capital, good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Huddy filling in for Rick Sanchez. We begin tonight with the shaky ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip. It was a week marked by a dangerous escalation in fighting, with rockets targeting Israel and airstrikes reducing buildings in Gaza to rubble. Well, tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary of the March of Return protests in Gaza that ultimately, as we showed you, turned deadly last year. So are we in for a repeat of that violence? We're covering the story tonight from all sides because it really is time to do news again. So let's get started. You've often heard that history has a tendency to repeat itself. In 2014, there was a timeline of events leading up to Operation Protective Edge, the war in Gaza, the longest war, by the way, in Israel's history, 51 bloody days. So is history repeating itself with the timeline of events leading up to this critical point now? Take a look. February 24th, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, known as PIJ, releases a video run on Iranian state TV claiming that it's developed rockets capable of hitting Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Netanya, and even further north in Israel. The video is quite possibly a warning from Iran to Israel that it can escalate the situation in Gaza whenever it wants. March 15th, rockets are fired from the Gaza Strip at Tel Aviv. Israel's Iron Dome defense system shoots some of them down. Israel responds, as it does, with attacks on some 100 Hamas targets in the Gaza Strip. Now, Hamas doesn't claim responsibility for the rocket fire, vowing instead to investigate and punish those responsible. Still, Israel holds Hamas accountable nonetheless for everything that happens in the Gaza Strip. March 21st, President Trump announces the United States' official recognition of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, tweeting, "After 52 years, it is time for the United States to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which is of critical strategic and security importance to the state of Israel and regional stability." And that continued on March 25th. 4 days after that tweet, on that Monday, President Trump signs an official declaration recognizing Israel's sovereignty in the Golan during a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House. Again, a very, very important moment. Later that same day, rocket fire targets a home in Mishmeret, just north of Tel Aviv, pretty much destroying the home. Nobody was hurt. Message sent and received? Well, the Gaza Strip lights up. Israel responds with force, attacking dozens of targets. Rockets are fired at Israel, back and forth. Prime Minister Netanyahu cuts his D.C. trip short, flies back to Israel to convene an emergency security cabinet session. Israel calls up IDF reservists and deploys 2 brigades to the Gaza border. The military is on high alert. Egyptian mediators step in and broker a ceasefire. There's some sporadic rocket fire the next couple days. Well, that brings us to the present. For some perspective, let's take a look at the region that we're talking about. Here's a map. You see the Middle East here. Israel, right here along the Mediterranean. To the north, you have Syria. To the northeast. Directly above Israel, you have Lebanon. To the east, Jordan. Egypt to the south, the Gaza Strip, and then the Golan Heights. That region, basically the plateau, and then the mountainous region separating Israel and Syria. Remember, Israel took control of the Golan back in 1967 during the Six-Day War and then annexed it in 1981. A contentious issue that remains today. Tomorrow, though, March 30th, marks the one-year anniversary of the March of Return protests in Gaza. So will there be bloodshed once again, or will there be peace? RT correspondent Dan Cohen joins us live now. And Dan, like myself, you've spent a lot of time there. You were there in 2014 during Operation Protective Edge. We've talked about this. You've been in Israel quite a bit as well. You know the region very well. The stakes are high at this point. What's the latest that you're hearing coming out of the Gaza Strip? And what's the latest coming out of Israel as well?
John, you're absolutely right. The stakes are extremely high. This could escalate into a full-on war with a lot of death in the Gaza Strip, and it could even go over to the other side of the armistice lines into Israel. Now, there's been talk of a ceasefire. As you said, it's been shaky. But just today, there have been sporadic protests along the separation fence, and the Gaza's Ministry of Health has reported that Israeli soldiers killed one Palestinian protester and injured 10 others, including a medic. So it's
already,
really already, and this is, and, you know, I mean, we're hearing that, you know, the ceasefire is supposed to hold, but at the same time, there's already violence, so it could go any which way.
There's always the potential, and as we go into tomorrow, I mean, we're talking about possibly thousands, tens of thousands. Hamas is calling for the million-man march. I don't know if a million people are necessarily going to go there, but if we're talking about thousands of people, really the question is, how much of a response will Israel have? If we're talking about people getting right up to the border, things get dicey there. Will Israel start firing? Because keep in mind, remember, last year you covered this. Israel still is under investigation for war crimes, right? There's still an investigation having to do with Israel's response. Now, Israel maintains that it's going to protect its borders, but do you think Israel will be heavy-handed? Do you think they may step back, depending on what happens on the other side of the border?
Well, if today and every Friday, basically since the Great March of Return began 1 year ago, is any indication, then it's likely that Israel will use live fire, shoot to kill. I mean, in the last year, we've seen Israel kill 195 Palestinian protesters, including 41 children, journalists, medics, and 29,000 Palestinians have been injured. So it's been very serious. There's no indication that Israel will, hold its fire or really hold back tomorrow. There has been talk from officials.
But Israel does maintain. I'm going to jump in that some of the people that it was firing at were Hamas militants. And again, it's kind of the bottom line. Israel continues, with Netanyahu, Avigdor Lieberman, that we're going to protect our borders. And if we feel people are trying to cross and infiltrate, we will defend.
All right, I'm going to push back.
Sure.
It's actually not a border. It's an armistice line going back to 1948 when Israel was created. And basically the policy was any refugee who tries to return to what became Israel would basically be shot on sight. And that's the policy that we've seen ever since. And it's a continuation of that. But there is definitely the possibility that there's use of live fire, and even if some are Hamas militants, if they're not engaging in military action, then I don't see the sense in shooting them. Okay,
I'm going to switch over to Michael Maloof. We're going to talk now about the Golan Heights. I mean, all of this fits together. We're talking about Gaza, Hamas. Earlier this week, President Trump's official declaration recognizing the sovereignty, as we talked about, Israel's sovereignty over the Golan. All of this, it's really hitting kind of critical points. The barometric pressure is really going up. First of all, President Trump's declaration doesn't necessarily change anything on the ground. It is symbolic. It's coming just 2 weeks before the Israeli elections on April 9th. But why is this significant, and potentially how could it increase and continue to increase tensions in the region?
Well, it's a crescendo that's building, and we're reaching a critical mass at this point. And it's all coming together just before the Israeli elections on the 9th of April. And we have Netanyahu facing internal indictment. So he's under fire for not responding hard enough against Hamas, and that's why his opposition and people within Israel are even more upset with him, because he's been quote, restrained in his response.
And we've seen a number of nations. We've seen the Arab League, European Union, of course, Middle East nations speaking out against and denouncing this. Why is this strategically important for Israel, number one? And also, the Russians are not happy about this.
No, they're not.
Number two.
No, they're not. And what's intriguing is that it's not only a strategic site for Israel historically, which they took over back in the Six-Day War in '67. They actually annexed that region in '81, but now also that area, because of its elevation, supplies 15% of all the water.
Mount Hermon, the mountainous region there, yeah.
That's very critical. That is a strategic asset, and it also applies to Jordan. They control that water source that might even go into Jordan as well.
Wow.
So this is not only strategic, and the point that you just made about the other Arab countries.
And we got to wrap it up.
Us.
We got
Okay.
a couple more seconds, but go ahead, make your point.
Even the Arab countries are against what's just happened, and Saudi Arabia in particular is absolutely apoplectic about this, and it means that Saudi Arabia is the linchpin for the Trump administration Middle East policy.
Well, we could talk about this all day, but we got to switch over to another topic. Guys, thank you, Dan Cohen, Michael Maloof. Pleasure. Good discussion.
I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.